what I wanted to ask you about was the hopes that countries like Estonia have for defence after Brexit. I think a lot of British people, especially next year when it's the 100th anniversary of Estonian independence, will remember the role that Britain played in that war, possibly, we might think, one of the noblest moments of our history. And this is how a lot of us would, a lot of British people, would like to see Britain after Brexit. That the essence of...
NATO will survive in any case. But...
Well, yes. We want to be the best friend to our friends, but not, obviously, in European Union structures. What we don't understand is why there are so many people in defence circles in countries like Estonia, in this part of the world, who are so enthusiastic on not only European Union defence structures, but British involvement in them.
I doubt really that we are enthusiastic. Again, maybe some politicians are trying to express really that, but not all people in Estonia. Because for us it's natural, we know that we are members of the NATO. NATO is that the only one organization which is able to protect us if something will happen, but not EU. EU was really such an economical international organization for us. From my point of view, not only from my point of view. For that reason, we are not so nervous concerning that one, because we know that Brits told us that they will stay in NATO, they will continue to support us. You know that the battle group is here now,
well, yes,
and they will continue.
Several thousand British soldiers there.
We are fully convinced that all that very close relationship with Great Britain will continue in the future also, because we had been together in Helmand. Before that, side by side, they say what kind of reason would be to cut such a relationship?
Well, this is it. We don't understand that there would be any reason at all. But just, I think, 2 weeks ago, many European Union countries signed up to this PESCO, this permanent, and Britain didn't do it then. I think a lot of British people have grave suspicions about the European Union's ambition to take over military defence. I think we even have the suspicion that they want an army for...
Frankly say, I'm afraid rather that they will sign the paper or nothing more. The similar situation which has happened with EU, that's military, let's say, pillar, or what does it call? They had only some kind of staff, chairman of the staff, nothing more. And small units for such EU scale or inside of EU operations, but nothing more. Main really garant for us is NATO.
NATO. Yes. I've heard people use this expression "guns before Brussels" because they see that maybe NATO structures or the relationship Estonia has now with Britain, which has real soldiers and real capability on the ground. They see that in stark contrast to, as you say, the European Union, which will make more structures, maybe more staff officers, but no new actual military capability.
We don't have anybody from the EU system, I mean militaries here, and I don't foresee in that one also, because the EU, let's say, military capabilities channeled
yes.
towards Africa, for example, Mediterranean area, let's say, far from the Europe, not for the self-defense of the Europe, let's say.
Well, yes, I think
the Red Sea, etc.
Yeah, and I think the French
fighting against the piracy. It's not so close for us as, for example, our own security.
Well, of course, yes. There's maybe an awkward question about how Brexit might affect Britain's involvement in the defence of a country like Estonia.
No, any critics?
No, not any critics, but the events at the end of last week, when Theresa May was many of us feel humiliated by the European Union. But some people deny that. They think it was a reasonable deal under the circumstances. But nevertheless, there was a sizable percentage of British people who felt that Britain is now in the position that Estonia was during the applicant period. A similar situation to Greece, where the machinery of the European Union works to humiliate the other party. We certainly felt that was the case. We also see people like Guy Verhofstadt who are openly hostile to Britain, and we think there's a certain logic to this, that if Britain leaves the European Union and is successful, it will weaken the authority of the European Union over the remaining member states.
No doubt about that.
No doubt. Well, now there is almost open revolt in Poland and Hungary. But it could almost develop into a situation where the people in Brussels, the real elite in Brussels, see it as a them or us situation.
You mentioned there is some kind of animosity against Great Britain from Brussels?
Well, I think animosity, but I think there is a cool logic behind it. This is the problem that I can see coming up, that there would be a European Union which was hostile to Britain.
They are not hostile, maybe that leadership, maybe politicians, some politicians are.
Oh yeah, well I don't think European people that don't feel any hostility to Britain over Brexit. It's possibly just the opposite, but we
are not in favour concerning that one. Some kind of quarrel, even the family sometimes happening something similar, but for us it's not good. But from the other side, because we have discussed also in NATO and with Brits also, what are you going to do concerning the members of the NATO? We need it. That Great Britain also, I guess, needed to be a member.
The concern is, though, if the hostility between London and Brussels continues to develop over the years, and of course we're just talking a scenario here, countries like Estonia would have a defence relationship with Britain and not with Brussels. And yet Brussels, its authority depends on at least soft power and the issue of Russia.
See, it's also we had all that, because you remember that EU battalions, battle groups. We have participated also by company or by platoon, but they were not engaged in some kind of operation, nothing. We lost a lot of money without any results for that. By that reason, I guess even in the EU itself, it's not popular to have such battle groups, EU battle groups. What's the purpose of them?
I don't know. It mystifies British people.
No engagement concerning that one.
Still, well, I think for most British people, when they see these things, they see it as being dangerously stupid, because the European Union wants an army for vanity. Because if it's a state, you've got to have an army, you've got to have people marching up and down at your parades. But there's another fear, and that is really it wants an army for internal repression. So if there are riots in Greece, for instance, if they want to arrest a Polish politician, one of the attributes of a state which the European Union doesn't really have is force. And that scares British people enormously, especially with Brexit, because we're the enemy. But the dark scenario that I can see is that the European Union, when countries like Estonia joined, it made its authority on two pillars: fear of Russia and the application of money to business leaders and such people in structural funds and regional funds. The funding will expire in just a couple of years' time. If the real hard defence from Russia is coming from NATO and from Britain, that leaves the European Union in a very awkward situation. It could potentially force a country like Estonia to choose between its loyalties.
No, we can express our loyalties to NATO also. No doubt about that. And what I think, my impression is that the EU is scared the United States. You remember when the Trump was in Europe this time, he told that the United States refused to support those countries in NATO who doesn't pay, let's say, those 2% from GDP. My understanding is that by that reason they're trying now to create something, some kind of capability inside of EU. But it doesn't mean that it will be some concurrent, or does it called, for NATO. No. They are not able to do it. They had a lot of time for that. Nothing was changed, has happened really. By that reason, I don't foresee in the future the same also. What is the reason? To see on the two chairs, NATO, EU, military, let's say, military chairs. I know also Stoltenberg he's strongly supporting NATO. And he told, I have participated in Turkey one time, and the second was in Norway. That he told really that the main for us, as a guarantee for the security, is NATO. And frank to say, EU military capabilities as a youngest brother, let's say, for such a supportive operations, small operations, small scale operations. But I don't trust. I don't believe that something will happen now. PESCO, maybe also okay. If we are talking about the military system capability, etc., maybe it will be even better in that case. Those countries who are paying much more smaller for the defense, as we, for example, or Great Britain or United States, maybe will be encouraged to pay much more. It means that maybe it will increase the defense capability of the Europe itself. But of course, without the NATO, Western Europe is not ready yet to defend itself. I fully agree, and I have had a lot of, let's say, such a, even quarrels, let's say, discussions with our partners from the Western countries, or let's say Denmark, or even with Germany, where they have 170,000 guys, professionals in military, it's all, nothing more, 3 divisions only. For such a huge country. Yes. It's not normal. My understanding maybe that PESCO will support really to increase more money, maybe more attention also concerning the defense issue in EU. But it's not a threat for NATO.
As I understand it, there is a program with the USA where the USA makes a grant to Estonia for defence to spend on weapons. The only thing is that, of course, these are American weapons and ammunition, which is fair enough. They make good weapons.
I had been in US last week, 1 week. We were in Washington and visited also. What does it called in English? Senate.
Yes.
We have visited Congress really. And they will give for 3 Baltic countries $100 million next year. You know about that. Yeah. Equally for 3 all of them. Of course, they will give not the money, but they will give some.
Yes.
Maybe armament, ammunition, and equipment, whatever.
Well, this is good. It stops it being spent on pensions of staff officers the way the Belgians do. But the reason I think the European Union is eyeing that is that they would much like it if countries were buying German weapons rather than spending the money. I think an element of these structures is a harmonisation of procurement.
I agree, because Europe is strange concerning that form. Each country has their own tank, let's say, some 5 different kind of tanks, for example. It's also similar if you are talking about anti-tank weaponry. It's not normal, no standards. And by that reason also, maybe with PESCO, maybe they will decide in that framework that what's better to go ahead. Frankly, I repeat again, I don't foresee any big trouble.
Yeah, but I don't think you'll find many infantry soldiers who'd sooner have a Euro rifle rather than maybe an American one, or the best the market can produce.
We are fully satisfied when we will be closely related with Great Britain. We have experience concerning long term with Americans. They had been also in Helmand.
Yes.
One Marine division even. By that reason, we are not so interested so much to have some as the other countries. Of course, French guys have been also, one company task force or a tactical group. What's it called? I don't know in English. It's a company task force or tactical group. What's the right name? Or is the same?
The jargon will have changed since I was in the army.
Huh?
The jargon will have changed since I was in the army. I'm not sure what all these different groups are called now. But I think generally, I think there is. You and I then have a consensus that Brexit holds no particular concerns for defence.
Concerning defence, we don't have such a big concern. But it will happen in the EU. It's much more or less such a topic for concern.
Well.
The West Europe now mainly from the NATO point of view and the EU point of view. What is your assessment, Rari, concerning the Russia future behavior? Let's say.
Ooh.
Putin announced that he will be participating in the election. It's clear that he will continue, no doubt about that. But
I think whenever you're talking about Russia and you're talking about men like Vladimir Putin and Lavrov, you have to start from the assumption that they're cleverer than I am. They know something I don't. And you, therefore, trying to understand what they're doing may lead it, I think, into dangerous situations, because an Englishman can never really understand a Russian. We're too different. We can't really understand.
For Western people, it's always very difficult to understand Russians. Mentality is different completely.
Also, you cannot underestimate the sheer genius of men like Vladimir Putin. With Turkey, the Turks shoot down a Russian aeroplane. Within a week, well, maybe it was a bit longer than a week, but it was almost instantly. They're the best of friends, and now they're close allies. To achieve that, that's a level of diplomatic achievement that European Union diplomats could only dream of. To admire the Russians, as I think in a way that I do, is not to like them, but I think the European Union is using them as a convenient bad guy in order to justify, their own existence.
They are really bad guys. I mean, you're talking about Moscow, yeah?
Yes.
Because
most Russian people are really decent people.
Two aggressions against Georgia, against Ukraine. How it's possible to explain?
Hey, we all do it.
No.
Come on, we all do it. I mean, Britain, in the same period, look at Britain's record of involvement in Iraq, Libya. These were much more bloodthirsty interventions than anything the Russians have done, and far more catastrophic.
It's closed. It's closed the show for us also. Maybe Baltic countries will be the third one. It's a main threat for us, for example, that Russian, let's say, aggressiveness, what does it call?
Aggression, well, it's like a lot of things. It's not a matter of the likelihood of it happening. When I drove to Tallinn from my house, I have got no expectations whatsoever that I'm going to crash my car. I haven't crashed my car since I was a very young man, but I still wear my seatbelt. in all probability, maybe the Russians have got no intention whatsoever of taking.
We know them very well, then.
But
Through the
it's
centuries,
still
right?
best to have sufficient defences to make sure it doesn't happen.
It still doesn't happen because we are members of the NATO and the EU. Three countries.
I think the most
Look the others, please.
the likelihood of it happening, I see as one of the potential darker consequences of Brexit. If you have NATO as it is at the moment, then I would say there's no chance whatsoever of Russia making some kind of invasion of these countries. It would lead to a third world war. The Russians are not that mad. You know, it's important for us also. We understand it very clearly. But the only thanks to the participation in NATO, we survive. Well, go with me with a couple of rather outrageous scenarios. Very, very, very unrealistic talk. Okay. Imagine that the talks between Britain and the European Union get worse and worse, and they break down, and the European Union does try to punish Britain. It tries to economically damage Britain. What if it does even more than that? Last week we saw them stirring up trouble with Ireland. The problem with Ireland is that the Irish government and Sinn Féin are competing for votes, so they have to each be more nationalistic. The European Union saw that problem, and it is bringing back the threat of the Troubles. It's almost in so many words saying, do what we say, or we will bring back the Troubles to Northern Ireland. This would, this would be a real killing war again. Imagine that the European Union has to hurt Britain and it doesn't negotiate a good trade agreement. It fails to negotiate a good trade agreement with the very intention of damaging the British economy. Right. In such a situation, Britain may have difficulty affording all the armaments that come to a country like this. Also, it may be very difficult to go to the British people at an election and ask for taxpayers' money to fund the defence of what is essentially a hostile power, the European Union. So they may say, no, we're not going to do it. But imagine things got even worse. Imagine that the sanctions and the trade embargoes on Britain actually started to work.
I doubt really.
Okay, no, they probably wouldn't. But imagine they did.
You're talking about the bad scenario, black scenario.
Very black scenario, but it might happen. That's also, there's a downturn in the world economy and the British economy starts to get a bit bad. And the European Union gets really hostile. Maybe we may...
It depends on those guys who are leading there. If we will change the people, maybe something will change also.
I didn't say this was realistic. I just said imagine it happens, because it could happen. That there was, a real conflict with Poland and Hungary, that they suspend their membership, they do all the things. Okay. What if the British people start to feel really lonely? They've got this hostile Europe against them. Nobody loves them. And they say, well, of course, the Russians can make a good cup of tea. We'll make friends with the Russians a little bit more. We've got to buy gas, we've got to sell our products. If the European Union is being hostile, we'll just start to make friends with the Russians. Okay. Coupled with that, the European Union economy really takes a nosedive, a really bad recession.
This year it's not so bad now.
Not this year. Not this year. But
still.
as it is after Brexit, the European Union will have difficulty funding its budget. Simply it can't, because the Germans will have to pay for the whole thing. If there's an economic downturn and the kind of trade war with Britain and potentially America gets worse, you're looking at a scenario where the British economy is suffering and the European Union economy is suffering. This is not entirely unbelievable. At the same time, Britain is feeling kind of isolated and makes friends with Russia, just a little bit, just to buy some things. But worse than that, the European Union cannot afford the defence of provinces like Estonia.
We know about that, but we don't take into consideration really even the capability of EU. For us is NATO.
But what if there are German people who are getting really, really cold in the winter, and the Russians say, look, we're nice guys, we can see you're having some economic difficulty, we can give you a really good discount on the gas, and we can do some other things for you. All we're looking for is more friendship. In fact, an enhanced friendship in the border areas. And at the same time as that's
true that Germans, they have a special position or approach to the Russians. I don't know why. But that's true. I know. We know about that. The Minister of Foreign Affairs also, the German one, seems a very good friend of Kremlin.
Well, before Putin came in, it was the case that when you finished being the Chancellor of Germany, you went to be a director of Gazprom. That actually happened. We're talking very unlikely scenarios here, but nevertheless we are talking about a situation which we've not seen for very many years, a situation which could take a dramatic turn. And to be honest, it's only in those scenarios that I could see any real defence difficulty for Estonia, because Russia would have to have a big opportunity presented to it, and the big opportunity would have to be friendship with Britain and a Germany which was so desperate it had to start selling off its provinces.
You know that Germany is not so deeply involved here. They have some company tactical group task force here. They are mainly in Lithuania, it seems to me.
Yes, but I'm not talking about hard defence. I'm talking about the financial difficulties of the European Union. If they cannot afford their budget, which after Brexit they won't be able to, and there's an economic downturn, maybe there's a banking crisis in southern Europe, a currency crisis, like what happened in Greece happens in Italy and Spain. That is not entirely unbelievable.
No, it's more or less okay. We'll see, I don't know. Maybe there'll be some crisis in a couple of years. Who knows? But you see, I'm a professional military.
Yes.
I know that which is linked with military, but I am not so good economist or even politicians. Our main trouble is Russia, no doubt about that. For all three, let's say, border countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, no doubt, Poland including, fourth country. We know it was Russia. We remember very well year 1939, when they also created here some military bases, and in 1940 we had been incorporated really in Russian. We don't want to repeat the same scenario. And I spent some 25 years in Soviet army, or Russian army if you want. But I know very well their mentality.
Well, you see, this is the dark, unrealistic scenario that I kind of fear. Because when you talk about 1939 or 41 or whenever it was the Russians changed, because the Soviet Union was on the Nazi side for the first half of the war. They only changed sides. But similarly in 1914 and also in, when would you call it, Napoleonic Wars, 1812, the scenario was a Brexit scenario. It was Britain isolated against a continental empire. We were fighting for our survival. British people, we're really lovable people, but...
I know the Brits had a special relationship with big Europe, let's say, and a special relationship with the United States also. Eh?
Well, yes, but the United States only became the dominant power after the First World War. But even then, what I'm saying is that the scenario of the Second World War, of the First World War, and of the Napoleonic Wars was a Britain isolated against a hostile continental empire. That, if we're not careful, is the Brexit scenario. The way that these guys are behaving in Brussels, some of them, like Guy Verhofstadt, that is precisely what they want. In that situation, the British people, as lovable as we are, we'll find a friend, and it's always the same friend. You know, we will open the gates of hell to survive. And this is why I think I think the option is for countries like Estonia who have an essential friendship with Britain.
We will continue.
Is to get onto the guys in Brussels and to tell them to behave themselves, because
I am not in favour in EU. It's a old meaning, my old one. But as a military, of course, first and most important is NATO.
On that note, let me say thank you for your expertise and advice.
But what I didn't understand. What's your recommendation for us, for example? As a country, let's say, country which is border country for the.
Well, the thing is,
adversary, let's say.
When last summer I was in Britain working on the campaign for Brexit. When I came home, my friends and my neighbours, you know, normal people, not political people, but just countryside people, they'd seen it on the news, Brexit. I mean,
is there a big difference between normal people and political people?
Yes. Well, I think there is. There is. My friends and neighbours in the countryside, honestly, old ladies came up, hugged me, and said, "Oh, Brexit." And to them it was just the naughtiest thing that they could imagine, and they loved the sheer naughtiness of it, the defiance. Nobody saw the Brexit vote as being a hostility towards Estonians or anything like that, or
we didn't take it also as a hostility for us.
And the idea, and they say, well, what should we do next? I think with Estonian politicians, business people, anybody, when you ask them that, the answer is as little as possible. Don't do anything. We're friends. Just carry on buying stuff. Carry on doing anything. Let it mean as little as possible. Let's have, you know, the Brexit relationship should just be as normal, as warm, as friendly, as profitable as possible. Because I think people here, they do not have the ambitions of the European Union. They don't share that vanity for a new empire.
For us, it's a economical side.
It's a pragmatic,
security side of the question.
So I think for countries like Estonia, who are peaceful members of the European Union, they're in a different situation to Poland and Hungary, who've already, you know, raised their banner against Brussels authority. I would say that you must exert some control over those negotiations in Brussels and say, we're not interested in this humiliation game of hurting Britain or in having some kind of conflict with Britain. The trade
we are
deal,
not in favour also, because we did need it.
No, and the trade deal that the British want is just a normal friendship, a normal business relationship,
We'll continue.
which is what everyone else wants.
If we talk a bilateral relationship, I guess no any changes.
You know, why have changes?
Yeah.
But the likes of men like Guy Verhofstadt and Barnier, they have an answer to this question, and it's a big answer. It's power. You know, they are building up power structures. The European Union, it's a regime, it's a set of power structures. Britain has left. This is a dangerous situation. This is not like when Greenland left the common market or when Algeria
left. Of course,
left.
it's clear.
This is the kind of moment that could mark the beginning of a decline of an empire. This could be the beginning of the end. So they must stop that at all costs. The only problem is that the people who will pay the costs are business people in Estonia, and if those nightmare scenarios really come to be, then it'll be the defence of Estonia that's at stake. So I think the people of Europe and the nations of Europe need to exert control over the people who are pretending to represent them in Brussels and say, we want what the British want. We want normal relationship. Just stop being silly. Just say, okay, you've left the European Union, but we're still friends. No problem. Take that approach rather than building it into an essential conflict of survival.